the chairs in her classroom that students would come to know the Lord. And in her class that particular year, there was a tall, gangly youth by the name of Charlie Kirk. And during the course of Charlie's 5th grade year, he commits his life to the Lord Jesus Christ. And it's an amazing story how God used a godly teacher to influence not just Charlie, but all the students in her class. And she did that for many, many years. But she had no idea the significance, the influence, the impact that Charlie Kirk would have someday. It's just an amazing story. And I asked Cindy when I began to put all the pieces together, and I said, Cindy, tell me what Charlie was like when he was a student, a 5th grade student. And she said, Charlie, the things that I remember, he always carried a football around with him. And then he was always organizing the other students. Even back then, we don't change very much. But he was a leader back then. So anyways, that's how we got connected, and that's why Christian education, Turning Point education, and what you're doing, Christian school, is so important to Charlie, so important to Turning Point USA. So I think it's really at the very heart of what Charlie sees as important. And we'll have the opportunity to hear from Charlie on Sunday, and I'll fill in the story just a little bit more. But tonight, we are so thankful to have Dr. Bruce Lockerbie with us. Bruce has become a dear friend, he's become a mentor, and has become a source of real encouragement to us at Turning Point Education. And there's a lot that I can say about Bruce. I'm just going to kind of give you the top line on Bruce, and then share a little bit personally. But let me just tell you a little bit about Bruce. For over 60 years, he's been an educator, a teacher, administrator. 34 of those years was at the famous Stony Brook School in Long Island, New York. We have some Stony Brook grads right here at the table, which is wonderful. We're able to visit with them. And he's written or co-authored or edited more than 40 books, which has been wonderful. For the last several years, he's had a consulting firm called Paideia Incorporated, and has consulted with many, many schools, colleges, seminaries, high schools, grade schools across the country. And as I mentioned earlier, Bruce and Ron, who worked with Bruce for a period of time, consulted at Christian Heritage Academy and helped them buy the property that later, where Charlie Kirk became a Christian. And so, just amazing how the Lord works in all of that. Bruce is a true friend to us, as I mentioned, and I dare say that if we added all of our Christian education knowledge together, and there's considerable knowledge in this room, I still don't think it'd be as much as Bruce has in terms of his decades of faithful, fruitful, God-honoring ministry and service as a Christian educator. He has so much to offer, has shared so much of his life. I'll let him introduce his wonderful wife and family that are here today. But we could think of no one better to come to speak to us and to you as new educators, as you start your schools, to hear from a man who's been doing this virtually all of his life, and the valuable things that he can share with us that will make a difference. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bruce Lockerbie.
Good evening. I think I told this story last year. A man was being introduced to speak, and he leaned over to his wife and said to her, "How many men do you know who deserve such an introduction?" And she said, "One fewer than you think." Lori is here with me. We've been married 68 years. Wow. Our older son is in Miami, but he's not in Miami. He's traveling the world including sports events and facilities. Our second son resides right here in the Tampa Bay area, but he's out of town. He's the headmaster, president of Admiral Farragut Academy. Damn the torpedoes. Go straight ahead. By the way, Farragut was an earnest believer. His Bible is heavily annotated with marginal notes, comments, very earnest Christian believer, and a great seaman from the Civil War era. But in his place, he sends up his daughter, our granddaughter. Her name is Caitlin, and if you got up early this morning and watched CBS TV, you saw her in a green dress hosting the early morning show on Channel 10. Sitting next to her is her bodyguard, Matt Tito. They actually met when they were students at the Stony Brook School. Matt, I want to brag on. Matt had the temerity and the guts and the courage to become a Republican candidate for the Florida legislature, and he lost to an incumbent who shows up more frequently nowadays after Matt scared him.
That's funny.
How many thousand doors did you knock on? 50,000.
Wow.
Okay, well, try again, because in case you need to. You've already heard about Ron Grosh, our son-in-law, and next to him is our daughter Ellen, who is a teacher at St. David's School, formerly chair of the Modern Languages Department, now teaching AP French and AP Art History when she's not coaching track and football. So that is the audience that I brought as a guarantee that I'd have somebody to talk about. Yes, we are Paideia Incorporated. That's a word you've heard several times today. Plato said, when asked what is the meaning of Paideia, he said, Paideia makes good citizens, and good citizens act nobly. And to that I would add what St. Paul said to the Ephesian parents. He said, parents, bring up your sons and daughters in the Paideia of the Lord. Not the Paideia of Aristotle, or Plato, or Socrates. The Paideia of the Lord. I have business cards if anyone is interested. So, what's on the docket for tonight? I'm going to try to entertain you and at the same time offer some counsel. We are delighted to be here at this Educators Summit and in the work of Turning Point Education. I have that right here in type. I didn't mind to make that up. Under whose banner we gather here in Tampa Bay. As I enter my 69th year in the vocation of Christian schooling, I am fully committed to the purposes of Turning Point Education and applaud your formal affiliation, knowing that it will strengthen you and your school to fulfill your institutional mission, vision, and plan, all through the lens of a biblical worldview based on the text of Holy Scripture. I'm going to post this in my office. And I'm going to put on my glasses because there ain't no light over here. The theme of this Educators Summit is transformational learning. You're going to help educating minds, hearts, and souls. Now, to ensure my understanding of its meaning, I consulted my computer's embedded co-pilot, and I found this definition of transformational learning. A theory that describes how people change their worldview and self-capacity as they acquire new information and critically reflect on their previous assumptions. Sounds like jargon. Such changes intend to foster self-motivation, self-governance, rationality, collaboration, and empathy in learners. I'm not at all sure how well this canned definition enlightens you or me, much beyond declaring that transformation results in change. Especially since I found a far better description in St. Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 12, the early verses. Be not conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, not by consulting AI, that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. This weekend, perhaps, as Jennifer has already suggested in her introduction, you may well experience such a change of mind, heart, and soul. In fact, a change in your own worldview and your new assumptions about reality from a biblical perspective. But what brings about that change? No doubt, a greater familiarity with Scripture in its context, but also an inspirational address, such as we've already had from some of our featured speakers, or perhaps a late night conversation with a newfound friend. That might be the catalyst, or even, perhaps, an after-dinner speech, such as this. Here's where I need to clarify my role in this event. As one of Turning Point's 5C schools, you and your colleagues are committed to language, to rhetoric, to classical origins. And so we need to know that we are gathered at what the Latin language calls a prandium, namely a meal that we enjoy at table. Because we are Christian believers and thankful to God, our meal was begun with prayer. As we enter into a pre-prandial experience. It may be a formal prayer, published, the Book of Common Prayer, for example, or it may be spontaneous. For example, be present at our table, Lord. Be here and everywhere adored. These mercies bless and grant that we may feast in paradise with you. Or if you've been a fan of Blue Bloods, you're familiar with the Reagan family's prayer in each of the hour-long dramas. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, which we are about to receive from thy bounty through Christ. I'm reminded of the neighbor boy who was invited home for dinner next door, and as he was served, he dug in immediately, and the hostess said, "Oh, Johnny, don't you pray before you eat?" And he said, "No, my mom was a good cook." Now, technically, I have been assigned to the duty of delivering a post-prandial address. One of the most dubious honors any speaker can accept. The very invitation carries with it more than a little perplexity. does the invitation committee really want? What does the audience really want? Brevity? How long before indigestion and other gustatory ailments overcome even the most gracious listener? The door is there. How short is too short? How long is too long? When is too much? Too much. I've had some remarkable experiences as an after-dinner speaker, varying from pleasant circumstances such as this to somewhat more humbling and hostile situations. I'm going to entertain you with some anecdotes from these events, but just as no worthy comedian explains his joke, and no effective orator presumes to need an anticlimactic summary of what he's just said, I'll rely mostly on inference from you to figure out how to apply it in your own circumstances. Let's start with the most common occasion. At numerous times and places, I've been invited to be the hitman or the hired gun, brought in as a fundraising expert tied to raising money for some worthy cause. It's a gala kickoff to a capital campaign, or it's an endowment fund to aid indigent students, and I'm asked to squeeze an extra $10,000 or $20,000 out of table 6. Early during such an event, seated with the head of school, the board chairman, and their wives, Lori will remember this, the board chair said to me, "I hear you're going to give us a 4-course banquet tonight. I'm really looking forward to what you have to say." And I backed him down a bit, because I've been asked to speak for 45 minutes, but it'll be much shorter than that. "Oh, no," he said. "No. Oh, give us everything we need to hear." You know, we're hoping to raise $25,000. But sadly, thereafter, every teacher and every coach was introduced to give a testimonial about what a wonderful school this was, and they did. And that was followed by a performance from every class and almost every student. At 10:30 p.m., I leaned over and said to the head of school, "If you don't put me on soon, it's going to cost you $12,000. That's not my fee." At 11:25, he began to introduce me, at which point a substantial portion of the audience found their nearest door. I spoke for exactly 6 minutes and sat down. Then I was followed by the board chair, who had a pitch to make
Oh my goodness.
for that $25,000 goal. Another group left, and Lori and I had a distance to drive ourselves, so we left. A few days later, I received a phone call from the head thanking me for my sensitivity to an evening that had gotten away from me. I asked about the response to the fundraising effort, and to no one's surprise, it had failed. And you can guess by how much? $12,000. How did I know?
Because that's how much they're going to cost.
Another time at a similar event, my host surveyed the audience and saw that the founder of the school, a very worldwide known philosopher, if I were to say his name, you would all recognize. He was present. And the head said to me, I see Dr. So-and-so in the audience, but I don't dare call on him because he'll assume that he's supposed to speak, and the night will end with that. So I should have listened to my host. I was going on early stages about the heritage of Western civilization and Christian schooling being at the heart of it, and I named some of the great leaders of the past, and I made the mistake of naming the elderly senior citizen founder of the school, who smiled back at me, stood up, and occupied the next 25 or 30 minutes before somebody finally tugged on his jacket and sat him down. On another occasion, the most interesting perhaps I've ever had was in Orange City, Iowa. Now, if you know anything about our geography and our immigrants, you know that Northwest Iowa is almost entirely populated by descendants of the 19th century Dutch immigration. And in Orange City itself is Northwestern College, sponsored by the Reformed Church of America, and a few miles away is Sioux Center, where Dordt College, the Christian Reformed College, occupies, and these are the two largest employers in the region. And so I was asked by the group, I think, if I recall correctly, it was one of the service organizations in the city, to talk about the future of Christian higher education. So I prepared accordingly, speaking about the demographics of the college age market and what strategies would be necessary to attract them to either of these two colleges in Northwest Iowa. But as I quickly discovered during the question and answer period, that's not what they wanted to hear at all. They were far more interested in my talking about the mission and purpose of a Christian liberal arts college in remaining faithful to the Word of God and the gospel of Jesus Christ. They weren't interested in the economics at all. They were interested in the theology on the campus. And I felt genuinely chastened by their fervor for Christian education and its purposeful future. On another occasion, it was not quite an after-dinner speech so much as it was a during-dinner exchange. Our family was spending time in our favorite home away from home, which is Cambridge, England, where we've been on several occasions. I've been honored to be a scholar in residence. I was working on a book using the resources of the university and the Christian library sponsored by InterVarsity Christian Fellowship at Tyndale House Library in Cambridge. We had rented a house from a major astrophysicist who had moon rocks decorating their shelves in his home. He and his wife were away out of town, but he came back on one occasion, came to his house and invited Laurie and me to dinner at his college, where he was also senior master. Downing College, one of the newer colleges founded in 1800. We appeared on that occasion and were met in the senior commons room where we were to robe, and Laurie was introduced as a distinguished guest because she would be the only woman to be seated at the head table since Queen Victoria.
Wow.
We paraded in from the senior commons room, and she was seated with distinction among the senior master's college. I was relegated to the farthest end of the table, sitting opposite a very pathologically bashful young English don. I tried to make conversation. I learned only that his speciality was modern European history. And so, of course, I posed a question about the causes of World War I. That's not in my field. Over the fish course, I asked another question about European history. That's not in my field. The entrecote of beef came and went, as I recall, and again, it's not in my field. And finally, the fruit and cheese was presented, and I tried one last time, and I got, that's not in my field. Then good breeding must have reminded him that it was now his turn to express some curiosity about the person from America sitting across the table from him. I was to give a little talk about American education later on. So he asked his question. What are you doing here in Cambridge? I said, using the British terminology, I said, I'm reading theology at Tyndale House Library. He went into a wince and a grimace and curled up his nose and tongue and eyebrows. And, oh, that's so evangelical! To which I replied, well, that's not in your field. Someday, I'll get around to asking God to forgive me for being so uncivil. But not tonight. The whole purpose of any after-dinner speech ought to be to place the entire occasion in some universal context worthy of being carried home. To be sure, we have come to meet and socialize with colleagues, to share a meal together with strangers, both of which are notable acts of distinctive, highest refinement of human behavior. Collegiality and companionship. Given their most conducive setting, these acts of socializing with one's fellows and eating together will lead eventually to the forming of community. Collegiality, companionship, community. And in this case, also affiliation and membership in Turning Point Education. The triad of collegiality, companionship, and community offers us a shared benefit of membership where we can rely on the experience of others whose profession and perhaps wisdom provides transforming resources not found in most graduate courses in leadership. As we grow into our responsible positions of authority, we will need to take advantage of such support as Turning Point Education. For instance, let me suggest that here in America we are quick, too quick, I believe, to attribute to any group a sense of family. I often hear someone earnestly describing relationships within and among their school's administration, faculty, students, parents, and referring to them as family. Not only is this inaccurate, he said harshly, but is also grossly sentimental. A family is a very particular social unit with prerogatives of privacy and customs. To illustrate, the Lockerbie family will contend that there is only one way to celebrate Christmas. Our way. I won't trouble you with the details of how that happens, but we don't readily acknowledge or admit to any deviation from our customary rituals. However, for many years, our family has chosen to meet in New York City on Christmas Day with members of several other families. And when we gather, we refrain from imposing the Lockerbie social system on others or acquiescing to theirs. Instead, we become a new organization, a new organism. We are a community of friends who have geared up to face the traffic because we agreed to get together at 5 p.m. on December 25th at 180 Central Park South. Happens to be the home of the New York Athletic Club. And when we're there, we rejoice in our renewed collegiality, companionship, and community, if only for those few hours. So too with our academic community. Each of us could carry on with our academic pursuits in a hermit's cell. Our students could read their texts in isolation. Instead, we and they have chosen to come together for the purpose of communal teaching and learning, intending to transform each other by our presence. The ancient sense of communitatis leads to a commonwealth of ideas and problem solving, of work and worth, yes, even wisdom, some of which would be lost without the benefits of the function of discourse among and between these persons. Just two more instances. I was invited to speak at the Centennial Convocation and Banquet for what is now Cedarville University, where Ryan Rush was a distinguished professor, in Ohio. My address was being broadcast on the campus radio station. Not like adjourning from the campus dining hall, I heard a familiar voice call my name. He was an alumnus of the Stony Brook School. By the way, Lori and I saw him again just last Thursday. A classmate and teammate of our older son, 20 years earlier. Bob, what are you doing here? I asked. He said, I live about 50 miles away. I was driving to an appointment. I turned on my car radio. I heard your voice. I had to come here and try to find you. I remembered him well. He was a young man who had come to the Stony Brook School from an unchurched family, for whom the whole idea of Christian schooling and Christian education was foreign. But by his 12th grade year, he had begun to think deeply about spiritual matters. I remember best as being in a Bible class I was teaching, the Gospel of John. When we reached chapter 20, the post-resurrection account of Thomas, Bob blurted out, "I'm in the Bible!" His classmates, of course, resorted to mockery and teasing, but he insisted, "No, I'm in the Bible. Look, it says right here, 'Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed.'" That's me. I've never seen Jesus, but I believe. On that occasion, and again last week, I asked him, "Bob, do you still believe?" Last week, he pointed to an inscription over the chapel door at the Stony Brook School. "Thy word is truth." He pointed to that last week and said, "I still believe." What an after-dinner conversation that was. But it all came about as a result of the most important after-dinner conversation ever held. At a roadside inn, a few miles beyond Jerusalem, en route to a village called Emmaus. According to St. Luke's account, two men, one of whom we know by name as Cleopas, are making their way following the brutal death of someone they had hoped might have been the Messiah. Suddenly, they are joined by a stranger, an unrecognized fellow traveler, who comments on their mood and engages them in conversation in which he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. His words are so profound that they are compelled to spend more time with him. They cannot hear too much from this person. They must hear more. And so they turn aside and invite him to join them for a meal. And what a meal it was. Their very own divine banquet, as he took bread and gave thanks and broke it and gave it to them. Some meals may give us heartburn. That meal resulted in burning hearts. So Cleopas and his unnamed friend became, in the literal sense of the word, companions. Those who take bread with, sharing with Christ himself the bread of life. What they learned from him transformed their lives. Such a feast can never be too much. And even if tonight's model of an after-dinner speech fails to inspire, the possibilities of your extended dialogue among yourselves after we adjourn, and throughout the time remaining until noon on Sunday, and then beyond that. All these can become part of what it means to experience transformational learning. First, for ourselves, then transmitted to our colleagues and on to our students. be near us in breaking bread. And do not then do. Savior, abide with us and spread thy table.
One of the things that you may not know about Bruce,